I didn't want today to come. A few months ago, I probably would have chosen silence. But when a man's lying in a hospital bed with no hair left after his third round of chemo, no taste, no breath that feels like his own, the truth becomes the only thing that still holds weight. I sat in my car outside the attorney's office, gripping something I hadn't touched in nearly 20 years, an old silver tape recorder scarred at the corners, heavy in the hand. It used to be something my father carried with him everywhere. It still works, I think. I pressed play on it last night just once. My father's voice dry, but clear-cut through the static like a knife. "If anyone forges this, they're no son of mine." I paused the tape. My heart didn't race. It just got colder. It started after my diagnosis. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. My brother George came to visit every day that first week. He brought chicken soup, asked thoughtful questions, sat by my bed with a strange calm I hadn't seen since we were kids. He told me not to worry about paperwork, that he'd handle everything so I could rest. I was surprised. But after years of silence between us, I'd learned to be grateful for whatever scraps came, no matter the source. Weeks later, I learned Dad had passed. No one told me. George handled the funeral and the paperwork. In the only call we had after the burial, he said, "Dad left you a little something. I've been named executor. You're not in the condition to handle that stuff." At the time, I was running a 102-degree fever hooked to IVs. Maybe he was right. Maybe I wasn't fully present. But I am now. This afternoon, inside that law office, they'll read Dad's final will, the one George submitted. But I know it's not the one Dad wrote, because I have the tape. And I have a son standing in the hallway, holding that recorder like it's the last thing keeping our family name intact. I don't know how much longer I'll live. I don't know if I can undo what George has taken. But I know one thing. The truth shouldn't die with the man who carries it. The first thing that tipped me off was a word. One word. Residential Remainder Trust. It was buried in the second page of the will George had sent over weeks ago, almost like it didn't want to be noticed. But it stopped me cold. My dad didn't speak like that. He was a plain man. Straight sentences. Nothing fancy. He didn't trust lawyers either. Used to say they hid truth in thick paper. I sat up in bed, pulled the IV cord a little too hard. A nurse rushed in, asked if I needed something. I said no. But I did. I needed clarity. I called George that night. He answered on the third ring, his voice sharp like he was in the middle of something important. He always sounded important lately. "Hey, how's the chemo going?" I ignored the question. "Where did Dad get that will drawn up?" He paused. "From a friend of mine? Why?" "Just Residential Remainder Trust? Doesn't sound like him." Another pause. "It's a legal structure, keeps things clean. Don't worry about it. You should be resting." He ended the call before I could ask more. No warmth, just clean cut. I stared at the ceiling afterward, light from the hallway slicing through the blinds. That phrase kept looping in my mind. Residential Remainder Trust. I could almost hear my dad scoff at it. 2 days later, I asked my nurse if she could help me find a copy of the original will. She hesitated, said that wasn't normally part of her duties. But when she saw the bruises blooming across my arm like little maps of defeat, she gave me a slow nod and said she'd see what she could do. She came back the next morning with a printout in a sealed envelope. It had been emailed to my old address. Dad must have forwarded it before the cancer took hold. The difference was immediate. Short sentences, no jargon. He even misspelled beneficiary. That was Dad. Imperfect, but honest. I held both versions in my lap, one clean, sharp-edged, professionally worded. The other, clunky, human, real. One had George's fingerprints all over it. The tape recorder was still in my drawer. I hadn't listened to more than those first few seconds, but I was beginning to wonder, what else had Dad recorded? And why had George been so quick to silence the conversation? There's a kind of silence that feels loaded, not peaceful, not quiet, more like the breath right before a storm. And that night, my hospital room was full of it. That night, the silence pressed in harder than usual. But by morning, the knock on my door didn't come from doubt, it came from blood. My son showed up on a Wednesday. No call, no warning, just the knock on the hospital door, and then him. Daniel, 24. Tall, thin like I used to be, but straighter in posture. Still wore that military cut even though he'd left the service last year. He stepped in like it was a stranger's room. Didn't smile, didn't flinch either. Just nodded once. Mom said, "You're not eating." I gestured toward the untouched tray of broth and crackers. That's not eating. That's survival. He stood there, hands in his jacket pockets, looking at the wall like it might offer answers. I hadn't seen him in 3 months. Not since the night I told him about the diagnosis, and he just said, "Okay," and walked out. "You didn't have to come," I said. "I know." He didn't sit, just stood. And in that moment, I saw my father in him, the way he tightened his jaw, the way silence sat easier than words. He finally looked down at the side table, at the old tape recorder sitting next to my glasses. "That yours?" he asked. "It was your grandfather's." He didn't say anything else, but he kept looking at it, like it meant something. I could tell he wanted to ask what was on it. But Daniel's always been like that, careful not to step where he's not invited. I didn't offer, not yet. We sat in the same silence for what felt like years. Then he said, "George called me." "Yeah?" "Said you're being difficult, making things harder for the family." That got a laugh out of me, dry and sharp. "That's funny. Thought he was the one rewriting history." Daniel didn't respond, just stared out the window. "You believe him?" I asked. He hesitated. "I don't know what to believe. I just know Grandpa wouldn't have wanted this kind of mess." And there it was, the crack, the soft edge beneath all that quiet. Not anger, not accusation, just a tired kind of disappointment, like he'd walked into something that should have been resolved long ago. Before he left that night, he walked over to the tape recorder, picked it up, turned it over in his hand. "It still work?" "Depends on the truth you're trying to find." He looked at me for the first time. Really looked. And in that look, I saw something shift. Not much, but enough. He put it down gently. Didn't say goodbye. Just walked out. But he'd be back. I could feel it. After Daniel left, I didn't turn on the TV. Didn't reach for the book. Didn't touch the soup they brought in. I just sat there watching the light move slowly across the ceiling like a second hand that had nowhere to be. The old tape recorder stayed on the table beside me. I didn't pick it up, but I kept looking at it like it might open on its own and spill everything I was still afraid to say. When I was Daniel's age, I thought silence was strength, holding things in, powering through. Men didn't cry. Men didn't explain. My father was the same way. He loved with distance, protected through control. Said few things that mattered and left many more unsaid. And I followed him down that same narrow hallway of silence. I passed it down to my son, not with words, but with what I didn't say. And now I was watching it echo back at me in Daniel's stiff posture, his half-answers, his refusal to ask the one question I knew was burning in his chest. How did it get this far? Not the will, not the betrayal, but this distance, this quiet between us. I reached out to the tape recorder, pressed the rewind button. Let it hum softly in reverse like time folding back on itself. I didn't hit play. Not yet. Instead, I let my hand rest on the device, felt the coldness of it, the weight, the rough edge where the metal had chipped. Dad used to fidget with it, tapping it on the kitchen table while talking. Back then, I hated that sound. Now it felt like breathing. The hallway outside was quiet. The nurse's station 2 doors down had gone still. The night shift was settling in. This is when the world slows. And when the voices you've tried to ignore for decades finally speak. I thought about what George said, about me being unfit, about not being clear-headed. And for the first time in a long time, I wondered if he was right. Not about the will, about me. About how long I'd been letting the silence speak for me. I looked at the tape recorder again, and quietly, without thinking, I whispered, I should have said something sooner. It wasn't for anyone else to hear, not the nurse, not Daniel, not even Dad, just me, just now. That's how the truth begins to come back. Not with a declaration, but with a whisper. It took me another hour before I pressed play. Not because I didn't want to hear it, but because I knew that once I did, I wouldn't be able to pretend anymore. Not about George. Not about what Dad really wanted. Not about my role in all of it. The tape clicked softly and the reel began to turn. I expected the usual hiss, maybe a garbled voice, some static. But then, this is Robert Allen Carter. If something happens to me, this is what I want to be clear. My father's voice. Rough around the edges, but firm. Not legal, not polished, just real. I've written everything down, but just in case it gets messed with, I'm saying it here too. My fingers tightened around the edge of the blanket. The house goes to Marcus. Not because he's the oldest or sick or anything like that. It's because he showed up. Silence. George is smart, but I don't trust him with people. Not with family. I paused the tape. My breath came out slower than before, not shaky, just changed. This was it. The line. The line George had crossed. He hadn't just forged something. He'd erased Dad's intent, twisted absence into justification. Because he showed up. That's all it was. 3 words. Enough to crack every defense George could raise. I hit play again. Don't let anyone talk circles around this. If this recording's being heard, someone's trying to do something they shouldn't. Dad coughed, cleared his throat. Don't let silence win, Marcus. I let the tape run its full course, even after the final click when the spool ran out. The room was dead quiet afterward. No beeping monitors, no hallway chatter, just me. And his voice still ringing in my head. I looked over at the will the one George had filed. Page 2. Residential Remainder Trust. Dad barely knew how to log in to his email. He hated jargon. Called it lies in a suit. And yet there it was, dressed up in fake language. His name, his legacy, his wishes, rewritten by someone who thought no one would challenge it. Someone who thought I wouldn't fight back. I rewound the tape, just enough to cue up that one line. Because he showed up. Then I clicked it off, set it on the nightstand. Tomorrow, I'd ask Daniel to listen. But for now, I just needed to remember how it felt to hear the truth again. I hadn't thought about that night in years. It came back in fragments, the way all regrets do. Not like a movie, clean and structured, more like a broken record skipping on the same 2 notes. It was my father's 70th birthday. He wanted something small, just family. George insisted on renting out the steakhouse downtown. Said Dad deserved something better than a backyard barbecue. I didn't agree. But I didn't say anything either. That's how it always went. George had ideas. I stayed quiet. Dad went along with it because it was easier than arguing. That night, I watched George give a speech, long, loud, full of jokes that made the cousins laugh and the rest of us uncomfortable. He talked about Dad like he was a war hero, a tycoon, a saint. I remember sitting next to Daniel. He was maybe 15. He leaned over and whispered, "That's not Grandpa. That's just George's version." I nodded. Didn't say a word. Didn't stand up. Didn't offer my own toast. Didn't tell the story about how Dad taught me to change a tire in the rain, or how he used to hum Patsy Cline while doing dishes. I just let George's version stand. After dinner, Dad came over and sat beside me. He didn't say much, just looked at the floor and muttered, "Guess I didn't leave much of a story worth telling." And still, I didn't correct him. I patted his shoulder, said, "It was nice, though." That was my moment, and I let it pass. It's not that I thought George was better. It's that I didn't think I mattered. Not enough to argue, not enough to speak. Now, sitting in a hospital room with a voice recorder full of truth and a son who barely knows how I feel about anything, I realize how many times I gave away my voice, how many times I showed up, but not really. That's the part Dad never understood about me, and the part I never explained to Daniel. We weren't absent. We were just tired of yelling, of losing, of never being the loudest one in the room. But silence adds up. And eventually, someone like George takes the silence and fills it with whatever suits him. I don't know if it's too late to change that, but I know this. I don't want Daniel to inherit the same kind of silence I did, and if that means hitting play, then I'll do it, even if my voice shakes when I finally speak. I didn't sleep that night, not because of the pain. That part I'd grown used to, the dull burn in the spine, the low ache in my gut. No. What kept me awake was a sentence looping in my head like a hymn I never finished. You showed up. It was supposed to be a compliment, a reward, but it felt more like a dare, because truth be told, I didn't always. There were days, even years, where I disappeared in plain sight, at work, in my marriage, with Daniel, and each time I told myself the same story. You're just quiet. You're not like George. But silence has a way of becoming permission. You stay quiet long enough, people start writing your story for you, and if you're not careful, they publish it before you even get to read it. I turned toward the recorder. It was still sitting there, unchanged, same tape, same voice inside. I remembered the last time I tried to use my own. Daniel was 17. He'd come home smelling like weed. My wife wanted me to lay into him, ground him, lecture him. I sat him down, tried to talk, but the words came out slow, wooden, like I was reading from someone else's script. He sat across from me, waiting to be punished or forgiven. I gave him neither. Just silence and a long look. That was the night I lost something between us. I felt it, like a bridge snapping in the dark. I've always thought of myself as the better brother because I didn't lie or cheat or take. But omission can be its own kind of theft. And in my silence, I took things too. Moments, truths, chances to say what mattered before it was too late. I finally said it aloud, to no one, to the room, maybe to God. I was afraid people wouldn't believe me. Not because I'm a liar, but because I never practiced being heard. George, for all his faults, knows how to be loud. I disappeared. I reached for the recorder, held it in both hands like something sacred. My thumb hovered over the play button again, but I didn't press it this time. Instead, I whispered, "This time, I'm not staying quiet." Not for George, not for peace, not even for Dad. For me, and maybe for Daniel. Because if this story ends the same way it began, in silence, then what was the point of surviving it? The next morning, I made a call I'd been putting off for weeks. His name was Richard Dell, retired estate lawyer, my father's lawyer. The last one he trusted before George pushed him toward modern counsel. He picked up on the second ring. "Marcus?" "Yeah, it's me." He paused for a moment, like he was measuring whether the voice on the other end sounded sick enough to matter. "Didn't expect to hear from you. Your brother told me you weren't up for much." That landed harder than I thought it would. "I'm up now." He agreed to meet the next day, said he'd come by the hospital. Didn't ask questions. Just said, "Bring anything real." That phrase stuck with me. Anything real. He showed up wearing a navy wool coat and a face that hadn't forgotten anything. Didn't shake my hand. Didn't ask about the chemo. He pulled up a chair, sat down slow, like the bones remembered every courtroom floor they'd stood on. "Tell me." I handed him the copy of the will George submitted, then the one I'd found from Dad's email. He took one look at the font on George's version and muttered, "Too clean." Then I slid the recorder across the tray table. "There's more. On here." He raised an eyebrow. Voice recognition won't hold up in court without supporting evidence. "It's not for court. Not yet. It's for you. To know I'm not making this up." I pressed play. He didn't blink during the first part. But when Dad's voice said, "If anyone forges this, they're no son of mine," Richard slowly leaned back in his chair. When the tape finished, he exhaled through his nose. A quiet sound, but it said everything. "That'll get attention," he said. "From who?" "From the right kind of people. But it'll also get attention from your brother. And that man has resources." I nodded. "I've got truth." He looked at me again, this time not like a patient, but like a man who'd finally decided to show up. "Truth's not a weapon unless you're willing to use it." I didn't answer right away, just rewound the tape back to the start. The reel turned slowly, and for the first time, I felt the weight of momentum shifting. "So," Richard said, "you ready to raise some dust or just clear your conscience?" I looked him in the eye. "Both." After Richard left, I didn't feel relief. I felt like someone had knocked the dust off an old rifle and placed it in my lap. It wasn't about revenge. It was about finally being trusted to act. But I knew I couldn't do this part alone. Not anymore. Daniel came by later that afternoon. Didn't bring food or questions, just sat down in the corner of the room like he belonged there. I let the silence settle between us before speaking. "I want you to take something." He looked over, his expression unreadable. I reached for the recorder. Held it in both hands for a second, then extended it across the blanket toward him. He didn't take it right away. "What's on it?" he asked. "The truth." He studied it for a moment like it might burn him. Then he stood, walked over, and took it from my hands. No dramatic moment, no music rising, just the shift of weight. "You want me to do something with it?" he asked. I shook my head. "I want you to decide what's worth keeping." He blinked, caught off guard. It wasn't the task he expected, and that was the point. He sat back down, holding the recorder in both palms like it was something fragile. "Grandpa really say something on there?" "More than just something." He nodded once, didn't press play, just set it in his lap and stared at it. That was enough. I could see the war going on behind his eyes. Not between loyalty and logic, but between the man he was trying to become and the boy who still wanted to believe his family hadn't failed him. I knew that feeling well. It was the same feeling I had when I first held the recorder. "If I do listen," Daniel said, "and it's what you say it is." He trailed off. "Then we do it your way," he finished. Not a promise. Not a vow, but a beginning. For the first time in years, I felt something shift between us. Not a bond repaired, but a silence filled. And it started with handing over what I should have trusted him with a long time ago. The truth, like legacy, isn't passed through declarations. It's passed through what we choose to carry and who we choose to carry it next. Daniel came back the next morning. He didn't knock, just walked in, same steady steps, same unreadable face. But there was something different about his hands. They weren't empty. He was holding the tape recorder, and he held it like it meant something now. He sat at the foot of the bed, didn't look at me right away. I listened. I waited. I didn't expect to hear him like that. Like what? Certain. Daniel looked up at me. His eyes didn't flinch. He sounded like he knew what was coming. I nodded. He always did. He just didn't always tell us. He took a breath, slow, deliberate. He named you. Clear as day. Said you showed up. That surprise you? Daniel shook his head. No, but it made me wonder why I never heard that part before. That hit harder than it should have. But I didn't defend myself. Didn't explain the missed chances or the years we let things stay muted. Instead, I let him speak. And for once, he did. When I was a kid, you were quiet all the time. I thought it meant you didn't care. He looked down. Turns out you were just carrying too much. He stood up and walked to the window. The light cut across his shoulder like a line drawn between generations. I called Mom last night, asked her if George ever saw the original will. And? She said no. She didn't even know there was a different one. He turned back to me. She wants to help. I stared at him, caught between pride and guilt. I didn't ask you to do that. I know. He crossed his arms, his version of bracing for what comes next. But if this is real, what's on that tape, then we don't just get to sit with it. We have to do something. There it was. Not a boy, not a soldier, a man. Not loud, not dramatic, but firm, present. Like a door had been closed behind him, and he wasn't walking back through it. You sure you want to get in the middle of this? No, but I'm more sure I don't want to be the kind of man who lets someone else write the ending. He walked over and set the recorder back on my table. Not because he was done with it, but because he was ready to carry something bigger. Us. By the time the sun dipped below the hospital blinds that night, the plan was already in motion. It wasn't grand. It wasn't cinematic. It was careful, quiet. Like building a fire from wet wood, slow, deliberate. Nothing flashy. Daniel took the tape recorder home that evening. Said he'd make a digital copy. Clean up the background noise. Save it to multiple drives. One for you, one for Richard, one for backup. I nodded. Keep one for yourself, too. I already was. Meanwhile, I asked the nurse for my phone. Dialed slow. Hands stiff. I called the bank Dad used for over 30 years, Midwestern Trust, asked to speak with someone who might remember his voice. The woman on the other end sounded young, unsure. But when I mentioned Dad's old account number, and that there might be a signature discrepancy, her tone changed. Let me pull up what we have on file. I waited in silence, the line ticking in my ear like a metronome. She came back a few minutes later. We do have a copy of your father's handwritten signature from a safety deposit document dated 6 months before he passed. Would you like a scanned copy sent over? Yes. Please. Send it to my personal email, and thank you. That signature could save everything. Or at least shake something loose. Richard came by the next day with a folder. Wore the same coat. Same look. He flipped the folder open inside. A printout of George's submitted will. Next to it, Dad's older one, and a draft scanned from his email. And now, my bank document, side by side. 3 signatures. "A judge won't take your word alone," he said. "I know. But these 3 together, it'll at least raise eyebrows." He leaned forward. "We're not trying to win a war. Just create a question loud enough that the court has to pause." I nodded. "And if George pushes back, then we push back harder, but only with truth." He closed the folder and looked me over. "You sure you're up for this?" "Not physically. I meant emotionally." I paused. "That's the only part I've got left." Daniel walked in just then, holding a flash drive. He set it on the tray without a word. I looked at him. He just nodded. This wasn't a battle about money anymore. It was about what silence had stolen and whether we still had time to reclaim it. 3 days. That's how long Richard said we had before the court moved to finalize the probate review. "Once that happens," he said, "the forged will becomes binding. You'll need a lawsuit to challenge it after that. Months, maybe years." I didn't have months. Maybe not even weeks. Daniel sat across from me, holding the folder Richard had left behind. "Why would George rush it?" "Because he knows no one's looking," I said. "And I've been too quiet for too long." He nodded, slow. "What happens if we speak up too late?" "Then Dad's wishes get buried under paperwork." Daniel didn't say anything after that. He didn't need to. The next morning, the hospital room felt smaller, not because of pain, because of time. Every beep of the monitor, every shoe outside the door, it all sounded like a clock counting down. Not toward death, toward decision. Richard came by at 9 a.m. sharp. He laid a sheet of paper on the tray table. I filed a request to delay probate, emergency challenge. Judge agreed to review it on one condition, which is, you have to speak. Yourself. On record. Within the next 48 hours. I swallowed hard. Speaking was one thing, but going on record formally, audibly, permanently, that was another kind of weight. "What happens if I can't do it?" "Then it all dies in a drawer somewhere," Richard said. "George walks away with everything, and nobody ever hears what your father actually wanted." Daniel leaned forward. "We'll do it tomorrow." Richard raised an eyebrow. "That gives us 1 day to prep." "That's all we need," Daniel said. He looked over at me. I didn't argue, because the clock wasn't just ticking on the case. It was ticking on me. That night, Daniel sat beside my bed. Didn't say much. Just opened his laptop, pulled up the cleaned-up version of the recording, laid out questions for me to answer, typed up notes from Dad's original draft. He didn't ask how I felt, didn't try to make it easier. But when I struggled to catch my breath, he adjusted the pillow without saying a word. And when I reached for the glass of water, he was already holding it out. That's how men in my family love, I guess, through readiness, through silence made useful. By midnight, the outline was done. The file was saved. The flash drive was set beside the recorder. Everything we needed sat in reach, and we only had 2 days left to make it count. I practiced the words 3 times. The first time, my throat dried halfway through. The second, I lost my place. The third time, I finished, but barely. Daniel sat across from me at the small hospital tray table, his laptop open, cursor blinking in a Google Doc titled Statement of Objection. Marcus Carter. He wasn't judging me, just waiting. "Want to try again?" he asked. I nodded, cleared my throat. "Your Honor, I'm not challenging the will for personal gain. I'm challenging it because..." I stopped. That line. It sounded right in writing, but not in my voice. It felt like something George would say if he were pretending to be me. Daniel looked up. What's wrong? I don't think that's my reason. He tilted his head. Then what is? I looked down at the flash drive, at the recorder, at my own hands shaking just slightly now, even with the meds. And then I said it. Because I let silence win too many times. And this time, I won't. Daniel blinked. That from the tape? I nodded. Dad said it, right before the end. Don't let silence win. We sat with that for a minute. Then Daniel hit backspace on the dock. Cleared the whole final paragraph. Say it how you just said it, he told me. Don't give them perfect. Give them real. I exhaled slowly, nodded again, and started from the top this time, from my gut. Your Honor, I know what this must look like. Sick man shows up with a recording and a claim, but I'm not here to argue details. I'm here because silence has cost this family too much. I stayed quiet when I should have spoken, and now I'm asking for the chance to be heard just once before the truth is buried. I looked at Daniel. He didn't say a word, but the corner of his mouth moved just barely, the closest thing to a smile I'd seen from him since I got sick. We saved the file, printed the document, copied the audio to a backup folder, double encrypted. The room felt full again, not with fear, not with tension, with readiness. Before Daniel left for the night, he reached for the recorder, then paused. You sure you want to go through with this tomorrow? I'm sure I can't afford not to. He picked up the flash drive, slipped it in his coat. Then I'll be there early, you just show up. It was a joke, but also a promise. Because he showed up. Dad's words again. But now they belonged to me. And I wasn't just showing up this time. I was speaking. He showed up unannounced, just after lunch. I was half sitting in bed, going over notes with Richard when the door opened. No knock, no warning, just George. Same expensive coat, same confident walk. But his eyes looked tighter, like he hadn't slept. He glanced at Richard, then at the folder in my lap. So it's true? I didn't answer. Richard stood, gave me a look. You want me to step out? No, I said. He's not here to ask questions. George let out a short breath through his nose. Not quite a laugh. Not quite frustration. Something in between. You really think this little stunt's going to work? I looked at him. It's not a stunt, George. It's a correction. He stepped closer to the bed. Dad gave me the power of attorney for a reason. That's not what the tape says. His jaw tightened. You're really dragging this family through court while you're like this. You dragged it when you forged his name. The air went still. No shouting, no movement. Just the long, heavy silence between two brothers who'd both learned how to wound without raising their voices. Richard kept his hands folded in front of him. Didn't intervene. This wasn't his fight. Not yet. George finally looked down at the tray table, at the flash drive, and the legal envelope beside it. You're going to die, bitter Marcus, you know that? I met his eyes. Calm. Even. No. I'm going to die honest. That stopped him. Just for a second, like he hadn't expected me to say anything that clear, that final. He turned toward the door. Whatever Dad told you, he didn't mean to split us. No, I said. But you did. He didn't look back. Just left. No slam of the door, no parting words. Just the quiet pressure of a man who finally realized someone was willing to outlast him. Richard let out a low breath. That was cleaner than I expected. Wasn't about being clean. I looked down at the folder. It was about not letting him think he'd already won. Outside the door, I heard his footsteps fade, and for the first time since the diagnosis, I didn't feel smaller than my brother. The knock at the door was soft, not the kind nurses use. and definitely not George's. I looked up. Didn't say anything at first. Didn't need to. It was Claire, Daniel's mother, my ex-wife. We hadn't seen each other since the diagnosis, not in person, just a few emails. Logistics, insurance. She stepped into the room, holding nothing. No flowers, no bag, just herself. And that somehow carried more weight than anything else might have. "I won't stay long," she said. "Just wanted to check on things." I nodded. She looked around, saw the papers on the tray, saw the recorder. Didn't ask. She walked over and stood beside the bed, arms folded across her chest. "Daniel said you're going on record tomorrow." "That's the plan." "You ready?" Not even close. She almost smiled. Almost. There was a silence between us that had been growing roots for years. Not anger, just overgrowth. Things left unsaid for so long we'd stopped trying to pull them up. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something small. A wrapped cough drop. Cherry. My favorite. She set it gently on the tray. Didn't look at me while doing it. Didn't say anything else. It sat next to the folder. This tiny, useless thing. But it hit harder than any apology ever could. Because she remembered. Because she showed up. Not to fix what we'd broken. Just to remind me that I hadn't done all of it alone. She straightened up. "If Daniel needs anything after... whenever, just know he has me." I nodded. He's been good. Better than I expected. He's his father's son. That time, she did smile. Small, sad, but real. She reached out and touched my wrist. Not long. Just a moment. A warmth I hadn't expected. And then she turned and walked out. No other words. No closure. Just enough. That's the thing about redemption. It doesn't always show up with fireworks. Sometimes it's a cough drop left beside a file. Sometimes it's a hand on the wrist when everything else has already been said. The room was quiet again. Claire was gone. Richard had left after reviewing final prep. Daniel was down the hall getting coffee, and for the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt still, not at peace, not healed, but present. Like I had finally stepped back into my own body. I sat upright, as much as my spine would allow, pulled the blanket tighter around my legs. The tray in front of me held all the tools of tomorrow, the flash drive, the printed testimony, a folded list of points Daniel had typed up the night before, and beside them, that cough drop, still unopened. Still cherry red. Still enough to say, "You were seen." I reached out and held it between my fingers, turned it over once, twice. It felt foolish, how something so small could feel like weight. But grief is made of things like that. So is grace. I leaned back and closed my eyes, thought about my father's voice. Don't let silence win. It didn't feel like an order anymore. It felt like permission to speak, to be heard, to stop carrying the past like it was my punishment. I thought about George, about the way he walked out angry but shaken. For the first time, I didn't need to outdo him, just outlast the lie. I thought about Daniel, not as a son, but as a man who had waited years for me to say something I didn't have the words for until now. And I thought about myself. Not the patient, not the brother, not the ghost in the corner of a family photo. Just a man, trying to leave one true thing behind before he couldn't anymore. When Daniel came back, he didn't say anything. He set the coffee down and sat in the chair beside me. The two of us didn't speak for a long while. Didn't have to. That's how I knew I'd found the center again. Because real silence, is different when you're no longer afraid of it. The morning came soft. No alarms, no buzzers, Just a sliver of sunlight tracing the edge of the blinds and the sound of Daniel stirring in the visitor chair. He'd fallen asleep with the file folder on his lap, still wearing his shoes. He looked younger in sleep, less guarded. It reminded me of when he was 10, curled up on the couch during thunderstorms, always pretending he wasn't afraid. I didn't wake him, just watched and listened. To the rhythm of the hospital machines, to the muffled voice of a nurse down the hall, to the stillness that no longer made me uncomfortable. My chest hurt, but it wasn't the usual pain. It was the weight of a moment not wasted. The recorder was still on the tray, but I didn't reach for it. The flash drive was already in my coat pocket, ready to hand off when Richard arrived. The cough drop? Still there, untouched. I slid it into the drawer beside my bed, not as a keepsake, as a reminder. Some things don't need to be used to be understood. Daniel stirred awake slowly, rubbed his eyes, sat up. "What time is it?" he asked. "7. You sleep?" "Enough." He nodded and stood, stretched. No rush, just readiness. He gathered the documents with calm hands, checked the flash drive, straightened the folded edges of the statement. He wasn't nervous, not anymore. That told me I'd done something right. When the nurse came in, I asked for real clothes. Not the hospital gown. Something with buttons, a collar. She smiled like it was the most human thing she'd heard all week. They helped me into it slowly. Everything took more effort now, but I didn't mind. Every button I fastened felt like a small act of dignity. A way to tell the world, I'm still here, and I get to choose how I go out. When I looked in the mirror, I saw myself again. Not the sick man, not the background brother, just Marcus. Just a man who showed up. Daniel held the door open as Richard stepped in, briefcase in hand. No need for greetings. We were past all that. The hearing was scheduled for 10 a.m. Plenty of time. Plenty of silence left to fill with something that mattered. The car ride was quiet. Richard drove. Daniel sat beside me in the back seat. Nobody played music. Nobody filled the space with nervous words. The silence wasn't heavy this time. It was waiting. We arrived 10 minutes early. The courthouse looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I'd just gotten used to seeing things from a lower vantage point. Daniel helped me out of the car. Didn't say a word. Just braced me with his shoulder and waited until I found my balance. We moved slow, but steady. Inside, the air smelled like old paper and cooled-down coffee. Everything was beige. Time always moves differently in government buildings, like it has to pass through extra approval before it's allowed to go forward. We sat on the bench outside the hearing room. Richard reviewed the packet one last time. Daniel held my cane between his knees, eyes fixed on the hallway. Tiles. I could feel the pulse in my throat now, not fear, just pressure. The kind that builds when something true is about to be said out loud. "If I forget anything," I said quietly, "just hand me the paper." Daniel looked over. "You won't forget. You don't know that." He studied me a second longer. Then said, "You remembered how to speak. That's the hard part." I nodded. Swallowed hard, looked down at my hands folded, nodded, trembling just enough to notice. Daniel reached into his coat and pulled out the flash drive, held it in his palm like he had back in my hospital room. "You gave me this because you didn't want the truth to die with you." "That's right." He stared at it a second longer, then offered it back. "Then let it live through you instead." I didn't move to take it, just looked at him. And he added, "Don't let silence win." Same words. But this time, they didn't come from a recorder, or a memory, or a courtroom document. They came from my son, from a man I'd raised in silence who had learned, somehow, how to break it with kindness. I took the flash drive, gripped it tight, not because I needed it to win, but because I finally believed the truth could stand on its own. When the bailiff called my name, I stood, not steady, not tall, but full. And Daniel walked behind me, just one step back, but no longer in my shadow. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not in temperature, in energy. People in suits glanced up without really seeing me. A clerk handed Richard a clipboard without looking at my face. To them, I was just another old man in pain. But I'd brought something they weren't expecting: my voice. The judge didn't say much. Didn't need to. He asked if I was ready to give my statement. I nodded. Daniel helped me to the stand. Didn't guide, just followed. Let me do the walking. I stood there, one hand on the rail, took a breath that scraped the bottom of my lungs, then began to speak. It wasn't perfect. I stumbled once, had to clear my throat twice. But I said what mattered, how the signature didn't match, how the original will named me, how my father recorded his words not to be buried, but to be heard. Richard submitted the documents, the flash drive, the backup recordings. Everything laid bare, finally. The court went quiet for a long moment. Then the judge asked if I wanted the audio entered into official record. I looked at Daniel. He reached into his coat, but this time he didn't hand over the flash drive. He pulled out the old recorder, pressed the red button, set it gently on the edge of the bench in front of me, and said, "Let him say it again." My father's voice filled the room, not booming, not angry, just there, just present. If someone forges this, they're no son of mine. Heads turned, brows furrowed. I watched George shrink in his chair, but I didn't look at him. I looked at Daniel standing at the side of the room, arms crossed, jaw firm, and I saw it. The line that started with my father had not ended with me. It had been picked up, carried forward, not in blood, but in truth. When the hearing ended, the judge ordered a formal delay, further review, and a full handwriting analysis. That was enough for me. Outside, the sky had darkened. But I didn't feel heavy. I felt right-sized. Back at the hospital, Daniel sat the recorder on my nightstand. Didn't say anything. Later that night, I heard him open his bag. He pulled out a fresh recorder, a newer model. No tape, just memory. And he placed it next to mine. "For the next one," he said. "The next what?" "Whatever story needs saving." That was the echo. Not my father's voice, not mine, but Daniel's willingness to keep something alive that shouldn't be forgotten. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of pain or worry, but because something inside me had gone still. Not gone dead, just quiet. Like a wound that finally scabbed over. The room was dim. The hallway outside hummed with machines I no longer feared. I sat propped up, staring at the nightstand. 2 recorders, one metal, one plastic, one filled with a father's last words, the other waiting for whatever came next. Daniel was asleep in the chair again, arms crossed, head tilted back. I used to think he looked like his mother. Now I saw traces of someone else, someone older. Maybe me. Maybe Dad. Maybe something better. I reached for the old recorder one more time. Pressed play. Not to listen to Dad. Just to hear his breath in the pause before the sentence. Even that meant something now. There's a kind of legacy that doesn't live in what we give, but in what we say before we leave. If I don't make it to the next hearing, that's all right. I didn't come this far to win. I came this far to be heard. Just once. Without interruption, without apology. without silence, swallowing it whole. The new recorder blinked, waiting. Maybe Daniel will use it. Maybe he won't. But I know this much. He knows the truth now, and I didn't leave the room before saying it. What would you say if you only had one chance, and someone was finally listening?